in a difficult period. And I'm really confident that that's what it will be over the course of the next 6 to 9 months. I think it will be a spectacular project that will show how much climate action has to be a bottom-up project, as well as policy implemented at a central government level or even an EU level. Anyway, I will get on to thanking who I need to thank, who've made this event possible. I want to thank first AIB, because without them, we wouldn't be here. They've been very, very, very supportive. We are very, very grateful. I particularly want to thank Colin Hunt. I want to thank Yvonne and Sarah and James. They have been great, as well as everybody else whom we have had to rely upon in the days coming up to this event. I want to thank on our board, David Begg, who is ultimately responsible for all of this happening. He was very supportive and he initiated the contact with AIB. Thank you, David. We are really appreciative. I also want to thank our panel. They have taken time out and they're interested in the project and they've been supportive, and I really, really appreciate it. The first person is Lauren McHugh from Ardara in Donegal. She's a businesswoman and an artist. The next is Rose Wall, and we've had a number of conversations with about this kind of work. She is the CEO of Community Law and Mediation, and they've just initiated their own environmental justice center, which we hope to work with in the future. The fourth is Daniel Lambert, who's a Phibsborough resident and the COO of Bohemian Football Club. The fourth is Anya McInwash, who's the Senior Research Officer at Chagas' Rural Economy and Development Program. Thank you for making time to be here. And then in a while, Anya Gorman will join us from Stop Climate Chaos, and she'll respond about the community level engagement with climate action. Anyway, thank you all, and I will pass it over to Sean McCabe, who is leading on this project.
Thank you, Shana, and thank you all for joining. It's great to have so many people involved. I'm just going to share a presentation here. I'll maybe ask the panel, can you guys see that? It's coming up clearly for you? Cool.
Yeah.
Yeah, so good morning, everyone, and thanks for making the time on a Thursday morning, a sunny Thursday morning, to talk about the people's transition. We're excited, as Shana said, to be launching 2 pilot projects, one in a rural community in Ardara and Donegal, and one in an urban community in Phibsborough in Dublin. I'm going to take you through a bit of a whistle-stop tour on where this came from and where we hope it will go. So there's quite a bit I'm going to try to fit into the next 10 minutes. Forgive me. If there are questions or comments, please use the chat function here. I'll try to get back to any questions as we go. But I am keen to get onto the panel, so I want to move through this quickly. So we'll talk about the background, the challenge that we're trying to overcome, the plan that we're going to use to overcome it, and our hope, the outcome that we're hoping for. So the background, why did the people's transition come about, and what is the issue we're trying to address? Well, I think we should always start conversations about climate action with the science, and we are heading for a very bleak future unless we manage to turn our boat around. This piece of work is premised on the fact that governments will need to take climate action in the absence of widespread public support. Now, I know some of you might be reading that and thinking, well, I read an article last month about how the UN Development Programme did an enormous survey and found that most people in the world care about climate action, and that is true. But ultimately, these surveys don't take into account how climate action features in people's lives compared to other issues like housing or healthcare or education for their children. So whilst we can appreciate the need to take climate action, it is one of numerous challenges that people face at the household or community level. And ultimately at the household level, it's very, very hard to understand what exactly you have to do to avert a climate crisis. So what I'm trying to say is climate policy intersects very immediately with people's lives, and rapid climate action comes with very real risks. And we've seen this. The Business and Human Rights Resource Centre has seen a significant spike in human rights allegations against renewable energy companies around the world. pointing to the fact that not everything that's good for people is, or good for the planet is actually good for people. We've seen how a regressive diesel tax was the straw that broke the camel's back in France and led to the Yellow Vest protests. And we're seeing as well climate action or opposition to climate action becoming quite a central pillar of far-right organizing, which is very concerning. And when it comes to this type of resistance, you know, it is about perception. It's about what people think. Myself and Lauren were just on a call with Highland Radio before the launch, and the question centered around, well, how is this going to impact? How is climate action going to impact our lives? Is it going to make our lives harder? And these are very real concerns stemming from a narrative that has been pushed for a long time about whether it's from vested interests or those wanting to see radical change, who have been telling people life has to change without giving people a vision for how that change is going to benefit their lives. So this work comes from a case study in which I had the good fortune of traveling the country in a camper van to meet as many people as possible to talk about the future and listen to what they anticipate for and aspire to. And that work gave me an insight into the need for bottom-up participation, or more confirmed what many people have been saying for a long time, that without the bottom-up component, climate action won't be successful. So fundamentally, people care more about local development than they do about climate action. If we can't accept that, we're not going to make much progress. And so it is essential that we align objectives in terms of climate action with what communities want. And it cannot ever be separated from the broader community development and well-being initiatives that are taking place. So we need to understand climate action in this context. We have to understand that we need to share the benefits and burdens of climate change equitably and fairly if we want it to succeed. And that's central to climate justice and just good sense as well. So what we're trying to create is a virtuous cycle, basically based around this triangle of participation, valuing of local knowledge, and co-creation and co-ownership of climate action. So once you have a community that's engaged, you can design climate action that meets their needs and priorities, and then enhance their standard of living through climate action, which in turn will hopefully build trust, which is essential to all of this, trust between communities and their local and national decision makers and the institutions that will roll out climate action. And that will create greater demand for climate action, which goes on to enable us to expand and accelerate how we take it. So if we want to do climate action fast, we have to be pretty inefficient at the beginning and meet people and get down and sit down and talk and have the conversations. It won't be solved by a rapid top-down approach. So this is the challenge. Can we empower communities and build community wealth while taking climate action? And a concept I want to discuss with you briefly is the concept of community wealth building. This is a system which came to the fore in Cincinnati in the US and subsequently in Preston in post-industrial communities where there was a need to reinvigorate local development. This model is centered around what are called anchor institutions. These anchor institutions are generally municipal buildings which have supply chains which feed them, and they direct those supply chains towards workers' cooperatives or community businesses that are supported and resourced by local development companies, essentially, and the municipal government. And those cooperatives employ local people. They ensure that working standards are high. They provide for a local fabric and return power to the local. There has been a lot of talk about anchor institutions in relation to them, and as a result, most of the existing community wealth building projects exist in urban centres. I think the two communities that we're looking at as part of the pilot project highlight that challenge quite well. Because a community wealth builder is a stable institution with real purchasing power, those supply chains that run out either into the community or globally. And the question is, can we keep as much of it in the community as possible? They have an influenceable spend, and they can be things like public institutions or SMEs or business organizations. But ultimately, there's a scarcity of these in rural areas. You know, if we look at Phibsborough, for example, we have Dalymount Park, obviously Dan is here representing Bowes. We have Mountjoy, we have Grange Gorman recently developed in the area, the TUD. We have the Mater Hospital. All of these are large institutions that could potentially be anchor institutions. However, in rural areas, we don't have that same density of anchor institutions. And that makes the challenge of progressive procurement harder. So there's two levels to this. First of all, progressive procurement to begin with is quite difficult in Ireland due to a lack of existing data and a very strict interpretation of value for money. But also in areas where we don't have a density of anchor institutions, progressive procurement is even harder still. So an economy that is fair and just won't come about by itself. It has to be created and it has to be distributive. And many of you will be familiar with the donut economics model that Kate Raworth has proposed as a means to see our way through this crisis that we're facing. One way to do that is through community wealth building, to build that social foundation of the donut economics model. And community wealth building opportunities exist all around us. It's just a question of having the ability to spot it and the ability to harness it. And it works, it really does work. In Preston, we've seen a model introduced in 2012, and despite overall spending in Preston falling significantly between 2012 and 2017, the amount that was spent locally and within the Greater Lancashire County increased significantly. So this model in Preston and in Cincinnati and other places has come under criticism for being protectionist. But ultimately, we're not really talking about protectionism. We're talking about maintaining a business within a community so that we can ensure fair employment, just labour markets, socially productive uses of land and property, the rebuilding of fabrics of active community engagement, and a return of power to the local. And this is the type of thing that can be distributed widely once it is prototyped locally. So let's step back for 1 second and think about the anchor institution challenge in local communities. What does that mean if we don't have the same density of anchor institutions in rural communities as we do in urban communities? Well, there's a potential here to use climate action itself. Now, climate action is going to be the largest public investment we've probably ever seen in this country. And we can use that to seed the types of cooperatives and community business models that community wealth building anchor institutions do in the urban model. We can actually use it in both urban and rural areas, and that's what's particularly exciting about this model that we're trying to prototype in Phibsborough and Ardara. So what's the plan? Really quickly, I want to get onto the panel, but if you're interested, the full plan is detailed in section 5 of the report, The People's Transition, that we published in November. This is it, or a schematic of it. As you can see, it has a political stream, a community stream, and a media stream, and it's about building a critical mass of attention and support. But to put it very simply, we're just going to listen to communities, we're going to learn from communities, and then we're going to attempt to co-create solutions with communities. What does that mean? Well, imagine this supply chain for a piece of climate action. This could be silvopasture, this could be the installation of solar panels, it could be retrofitting. There's any amount of opportunities. But the challenge is to identify what parts of that supply chain can be owned locally, localize them. And then on the national level, those local opportunities can be distributed to boost regional development. And then we try to figure out, well, once we know which pieces of the supply chain can be localized, how can we ensure that communities own those opportunities? Like I said previously, this won't happen by accident. This has to be an intentional approach to share the benefits and burdens of climate action. Just to give you a sense of the timeline that we're working with, March and April will primarily be focused on landscape mapping. So that's both engaging with stakeholders in the community, from business to residents to sports clubs to religious institutions, everyone we can meet, to understand what's happening in the community. What does the community feel like? What policies are interacting with their lives, and what is the what resources are flowing in and leaving the community. Then in May, we will have the intensive dialogue process. This is going to be an interesting challenge because of COVID. We ideally would have everyone come together in a room and trash out the conversations we need to have, but it will probably have to happen online. A big piece of the dialogues is making sure that people who don't normally participate in the types of conversations we want to have are able to participate. We want to remove the barriers. We want to make sure that this is seen as an activity that includes everyone and is not just for those who have the luxury of time or the level of education or the any set of conditions that would typically see participation in these dialogues. And then finally, it's about, we will have 2 months of co-creations of solutions where we will bring in the expertise that we need to complement the local knowledge that we've garnered from the dialogues and attempt to address 1 or 2 or maybe even 3 local challenges with climate action. The outcome, and this is important to stress, the outcome is unknown, but that's true of everything that we're doing in terms of climate action. Nobody can give us a clear understanding of the future. So we have to jump in with both feet and try. We're running out of time in a serious way. But what we do know is we'll have something of a blueprint. And that blueprint will, as I say, try to address 1 or 2 or 3 local priorities or local needs using community wealth building approaches to climate action. It's very important to stress there's a load of brilliant work ongoing from local government, from climate action regional offices, right up to the national level, where climate action is being planned and executed around the country. This is not going to duplicate those efforts. This is specifically about exploring the community ownership component and the community wealth building component. And so we hope to end up with a complementary to existing efforts, holistic and costed and implementable set of projects that we can hand over to the community. So thank you very much. That's the end of that presentation. I'm delighted to be done with that and moving on to a much more interesting component of this launch, which is a panel discussion. Shana has already introduced our panelists, but we have Rose Wall from Community Law and Mediation. We've Lauren McHugh from Ardara, who is a local resident, local businesswoman, and an artist too. We've Daniel Lambert from Phibsborough, who is COO of Bohemian Football Club. And we have Anya McInwalsh, senior researcher with Teagasc. Guys, thank you all very much for joining us this morning. And I think I'll just dive straight in and ask you, Lauren, if you don't mind, what do you think of when it comes to, oh wait, hang on, first of all, let me stop sharing so we can see each other. Perfect. What do you think of when you think of the community in Ardara? What does community mean to you?
I really strongly feel here that community means a collective outpouring of support. I mean, that's really the overwhelming feeling I have. I've been part of this community from my childhood here, from moving away and coming back. I think people really, not only in a crisis, but just any event that's going on, everybody rallies around, everybody gets together, everybody shares and helps, you know, gives their time and energy and donates to things. And I think that to me is what living in Ardara is about. That's what it feels like for me. I feel supported, I feel safe, and I feel like that if anything were to ever happen, or, you know, I can speak from personal experience. Like, we had house fire when I was a kid. I was 10, and you know that saying of people would give you the shirt off their back. I mean, literally that's what people did here. People, you know, were giving boxes of clothes and donating everything. We lost everything, or pretty much. So to me, that's what community is. It's this, and that feels like it's overflowing, that collective spirit of like love and support that people have for each other here.
That's powerful. Thanks, Lauren. We should say maybe at this point, because of COVID, I haven't actually had the chance to get up to Ardara and meet any of you guys yet, and I'm very excited to do that. But from the conversations we've had already, it's very evident that there's an immense community spirit.
Yeah, it's powerful.
I might jump to you, Dan, and just to say, personally, there's been a few epiphanies as I've gone through this process, but even before ever starting this work, and in realizing the strength of community. And definitely one element would have been what Daniel has created in Phibsborough through his own business that he owns with his sister, Bang Bang, but also the incredible work he does at Bose. So Dan, maybe you could talk about what community in Phibsborough means to you.
Yeah, I suppose what's, you know, Phibsborough would have been, I think it's a place that a lot of people know because they travel through it. So you have the two national road routes, the N2 and the N3, both cross at Doyle's Corner. And I grew up in Glasnevin, and I'm in Phibsborough now about 7 years. And for me, the Phibsborough that I saw was from a car window or from a bike or from a bus. And when you're passing through it, I don't think you get a sense of what's going on until you actually spend a bit of time here. And like a lot of the points that Lauren mentioned, I suppose, like when you think of events, there's too many to even mention. You have the space, which is a community space that FizFest have in Phibsborough Shopping Centre. We've had things like Street Feast, really strong repeal movement with, you know, very active kind of separate groups in various areas. And then you've got residence groups, history talks. We've had an outdoor cinema, a whole range of things. And that the words that Lauren mentioned, just safe and supported, I think are what come to mind. And I think that, you know, there's a lot of those national road routes, I suppose, act as a kind of a blocker to what should be the building of communities, but they haven't been able to overcome it. And you know, the strength, once you spend a bit of time here, the strength that the local community has as a collective to get things done in a positive fashion, to help each other and to create a good environment for people to a lot of the times it's the sense of place. And you think of Phibsborough, like as a place, James Joyce and De Valera lived here, George Best and Bob Marley played here, and a whole host of other things. It has such good stories to it and such a great sense of identity that the community here is really remarkable, and especially for an inner city area.
Thanks, Dan. I definitely second that, and like obviously all of those attributes that you mentioned played a key role, along with the anchor institutions that exist here, played a key role in choosing Phibsborough. But also, practically speaking, if we have to execute this project during lockdown, it's helpful that I'm in one of those communities. I'm very fortunate to be living in Phibsborough. We might move to you, Rose. Maybe a slightly different question, and something that we don't think of maybe very much is the challenges, that the justice challenges that people within a community might face, and that's what you're dealing with on a day-to-day basis. And maybe you might give us a perspective on the barriers that some communities and some cohorts of communities face in realizing their full potential.
Thanks, Sean, and thanks for inviting me here today, and congratulations to you and the team on the launch of this initiative. And as you say, you know, CLM's work, community law mediation's work, is about empowering communities to use the law to realise their rights. And there's lots of barriers to people realising their rights. Sometimes it's that the law doesn't offer the protection that it should, and the communities that we're working with don't have a voice or visibility in pushing that forward. And I might speak about that issue of visibility later. An example of a gap in the law currently is the climate bill, which as it currently stands has no definition of climate justice, no mention of just transition, and very weak public participation rules. But often the law is there and it's been hard fought to get it there, but there are other obstacles. So to paraphrase American attorney Kimberly Motley, the laws are ours, they belong to us, and they need to be used. But if people don't know about their rights under the law, don't know about how to assert their rights, or aren't able without legal assistance to do so, then those rights aren't being protected. And I suppose that conversation about the right of access to justice and the limitations of the civil legal aid scheme are certainly for another day. But I would like to say a few words about the issue of people not knowing about their rights. So people often aren't aware that the law or a right can help them in the situation that they're in or a difficulty they're facing. And often when people think about the law or about going to see a solicitor, it's to make a will, buy a house, or for a personal injury action or a commercial matter. It's not always for the issues that the communities that CLM works with grapple with, whether that's homelessness, refusal of social welfare, access to education and other services, or discrimination, the issues that most affect people's ability to participate fully in society. And I think this is particularly so when it comes to the climate crisis. You know, and I think that issue of perception that you raised, Sean, is really pertinent. I mean, communities experiencing poverty, social exclusion, inequality aren't engaged on climate change, despite the fact that they're most affected by it. And while awareness, I think, of climate change has increased, I think it is seen as an end of the world issue rather than an end of the month one. And I think there's a real need to reframe the narrative around this and join the dots, because the climate crisis isn't just an environmental one. It's a health crisis, a housing crisis, a jobs crisis, a debt crisis, and ultimately a human crisis, and one that is not being and will not be borne equally by all. So it's a crisis for women, for children, for older people, for members of the travelling community, for those on low incomes, for people with disabilities, because those who are most disadvantaged or marginalised have the fewest choices about where and how they live. They have fewer resources to cope with pollution or the challenges of climate change, and they have less visibility in the shaping of policy responses. And I suppose that issue of visibility, I think COVID over the past year or so has taught us many things, but one of them is the importance of social cohesion and solidarity. And the process for developing policy responses in the area of climate change really needs to be a participatory one, where the voices of the most vulnerable are heard. Otherwise, I think there's a real risk, as you flagged, Sean, that climate action measures themselves will make the matters worse for people. So I think we really need to engage with and listen to communities. And in doing so, we should work with community organisations and NGOs. We should join the dots, as I've said, and make that connection between climate and jobs, food costs, fuel costs, housing and health. We should make that method of engagement as accessible as possible. Also, like as you're doing with the people's transition, that engagement needs to be participatory, giving communities the opportunity to come up with solutions themselves, which will increase buy-in and capitalise on local experience and knowledge. And finally, we should give people practical tools. We should give people the law, things like the Aarhus Convention, which guarantees access to information, the right to public participation in environmental decision-making, and the right of access to justice in environmental matters.
Thank you very much, Rose. That's a fast and incredibly comprehensive rundown of both the barriers, but the opportunities. And I think one thing that, you know, as both Dan and Lauren have mentioned, there's great agency, great power within community, but if people feel they can't participate in their local community or are left on the margins, then the responses that we design will recreate the same power structures, the same class inequalities that we currently face. So it's about throwing open those doors of participation as widely as possible, and that's enshrined in the Aarhus Convention and other elements of democratic life. Anya McInwalsh, I'll turn to you now perhaps, because I think one area that we really haven't addressed well in this country is the issue of rural livelihoods, particularly around agriculture and also fisheries. And we know that climate action and these livelihoods will interact. But currently there's strong perceptions held that the only way they'll interact is negatively. What do you think can be done to address these concerns and really have a different conversation about the future of rural Ireland?
Thanks, Sean, and just compliments on this event. It's hugely informative and interesting. My contribution is from a research perspective today, Sean. And one of the interesting things that research tells us, one of the reasons that primary producers, including agriculture and fishing, are concerned about climate and environmental challenges, but also one of the reasons they might feel and be sidelined from opportunities emerging in just transition contexts, such as in the context of bioenergy, bioeconomy opportunities, for example. It's because often the dominant approach on the ground on the part of development institutions or policies is on, and I'll just give a few quotations from the literature, the dominant approach is on creating acceptance among primary producers for priorities that have already been set, rather than including them in shaping new opportunities. And this inevitably results, according to international evidence, that important segments of society, and very important segments of society where climate is concerned, they don't see themselves as part of a possible or desirable future where climate concerns are concerned. Also, an alternative policy approach that has been noted internationally is what's called the bioecology vision. And one of the marked characteristics of this bioecology vision is that it sees producers as designers and themselves managers of ecosystems, rather than mere commodity producers or input suppliers to other innovative projects, such as bioeconomy projects, that they should become actively involved in the design of these projects and take critical roles as decision makers. So some of the things that we are doing and have been doing over the past 10 odd years, we are asking from a research perspective. When we look at a social movement or a bioeconomy project, or even look at the social network nationally of who's involved in climate action, climate-oriented projects and so on. So we ask who's included, who is excluded, who are the dominant actors, who are the actual or potential change agents that could change either the projects and innovate those projects, or indeed could change the structure of the social network in terms of who's involved and who's not involved. And then we identify potentially powerful intermediaries who could create change and act as an interface for drawing in more inclusion into the social network or the social movement, more participation and more active involvement in terms of the type of design activity and decision-making activity that I've just described. One thing where primary producers are concerned, where farmers are concerned, where fishers are concerned, we often need to use, and we know this from evidence, existing connections. They're trusted agents, people who are already connected with farmers and fishers in the existing social network. We need to engage with these critical influential actors to create change, new forms of engagement, rebranding of climate actions, new bioeconomy activities, for instance, as something that are farmer owned and that respond to the agricultural value system. And it's not just about including farmers and fishers, it's about creating a social movement that is sufficiently scaled to be transformative and that includes their knowledges and values as a lever of innovation and introducing more forms of innovation that are widely applicable in farming systems. In the context of the Biorbic SFI Centre, of which Teagasc is a member, this is a Bioeconomy Science Foundation Ireland Centre. Other European projects such as Plutos, I think somebody in the chat this morning mentioned this project and other projects in Dingle, and also very exciting Teagasc initiatives such as the new Signpost Farm programme. We are taking a very particular approach, a co-design approach that I've heard from Sean this morning and also the other speakers. And this is really about working in living laboratories with people on the ground and climate experts, bioeconomy experts and so on, allowing all of their various knowledges and distinctive knowledges and practice and values to come to the fore, to be regarded and appreciated, to be negotiated, to be blended, and ultimately to shape solutions. And it is this philosophy, and I believe, and it is not just because I'm very attracted to the very process and the potential for innovation, but it's also really important to note that on the basis of international evidence, this inclusive participatory co-design approach is identified as absolutely necessary at the highest level of policy making in Europe and elsewhere as having the most potential to formative impact. And it's for this reason that I'm really delighted to be here this morning and hear the contributions of all the speakers. Thanks, Sean.
I have myself on mute. Thank you very much, Anya, for bringing that research focus, and the work Anya does with Teagasc really did help to inform a lot of how we got here, I think it's fair to say. Rose, I wanted to come back to you about the environmental, the Centre for Environmental Justice, which you've just launched last week, but I'm conscious Dan is against the clock. So I might just jump to Daniel first with a follow-up question. I'll come back to you, Rose. Daniel, just before you dash off on us, could you bring the Bohemian Football Club's perspective? Obviously it's a club that's central to a community. It draws its strength from the community. Perhaps you could let what we're talking about here is cooperatively owned climate action, and you could say Bohs is a cooperatively owned football club. What could we learn from you?
I think in many ways, like football has very much mirrored what's happened in society globally. The game has become heavily commercialized, heavily privatized, and the power has been consolidated in very few people. Normally people who are far removed from the communities the football club exists in, and normally people who actually have no real care or love for the people who created the clubs initially. So it mirrors a lot of what's happened, I suppose, with international economies. Thankfully, we've never been privately owned. We've been members owned since 1890, one of the oldest members owned football clubs in the world. And what that does, it forces you really to act differently. We're entirely democratic, and while many other clubs, and unfortunately this has happened in Ireland as well, most of our competitors have huge financial backing, normally from billionaires, and they act in a way that isn't respectful, or they don't have to act in a way, is a better way of putting it, that is respectful to the local area, because finance can just provide anything that's required. Whereas as a members owned club and as a cooperative, it's, our strength is in the strength of our stakeholder network, and that network is pretty local. And by having, values as a club and clear values, we can engage with various stakeholder groups and networks. And it's essential that we do that. And, and a key element to this has to be climate and climate action. And I suppose that, I think I've realized that a couple of years ago and was amazed by it. And it amazes me every time we do something a little bit different as a club. And your own appointment, Sean, in the last couple of weeks as our climate justice officer, like that was picked up hugely by the media, nationally and internationally. And I think that demonstrates two things. One, the reach that football has and sport has, but also its ability to bring about change. Because when a football club, or, and this can be, it can be any sport, and it can even go outside of sport, but when a community organization like Bohemians does something outside of the norm, it has the ability to reach people who otherwise may not engage with, the front page. They could be a back page person, but it can bring items onto their agenda that otherwise wouldn't reach. And we saw this when the club, I suppose, we've various initiatives. Like at Bohemians, we have, we've got a choir, we've a group of local artists, we have a whole range of groups that people wouldn't see as a club poet. And people often say, well, what's that got to do with football? And it doesn't really have anything to do with football, but it has a lot to do with community. And football clubs are one of the last things in society that are a cradle to a grave activity. So, people don't really go to church anymore in inner city areas anyway. They don't tend to be members of unions. They tend to have quite transient working lives, and they tend to have even more transient living situations with the prices in Dublin. So a football club, I was brought to Dalymount as a baby, and I'll go there until I die. It's probably the only thing in my entire life that I will do from when I'm a baby to when I'm an old person. And it's often irrational and illogical, but it exists. And, organizations like Bohemians have the ability really to bring people with them, to educate and to, I suppose, provide a value system. So I think that that's something that has enormous power and can play a huge role in initiatives like this.
Thanks a million, Dan. You've hit the nail on the head there, and like you say, the response to the climate justice initiative of Bohs has been phenomenal, not just in Ireland but across Europe. It's fascinating to see the potential of sport to advance agendas like this. But as Dan says, it's because they exist within a community. One point that maybe should add here is that there's a fantastic Green Clubs initiative being pioneered by the GAA as well, which we hope to learn from in the climate justice initiative at Bohemians, but also I think can feed into this project hopefully too. Daniel, if you need to run off, no problem at all.
Sean, I might just, it'd be remiss of me, I'm aware there's several elected representatives on, so for 15 seconds, obviously the development of Dalymount is in progress. It could always be faster. Thanks a million to Pascal Donoghue for the announcement this week, but that stadium, is a community facility. It will deliver a lot for ourselves, for Shelburne, for the local area, and for a whole other range of groups. So just for any representatives on, keeping that on the agenda would be much appreciated.
Thanks, Dan. That's a fair plug. Rose, we'll jump back to you, and as I mentioned, it's very exciting that you know, we spoke maybe it must be nearly 2 years ago now about the idea of environmental justice and CLM's potential to help the realization of it in Ireland. And last week, Mary Robinson launched your Centre for Environmental Justice. Do you want to tell us a little bit about maybe what you expect to encounter through that, and I guess how it obviously relates to participation and inclusion, and so overlaps greatly with the people's transition work. So really just where do you see that centre going and the work it will do?
Thanks, Sean. Yeah, so I suppose, I mean, it's not an obvious jump for us to move into environmental justice. I mean, community law mediation has been providing free legal services to communities experiencing disadvantage since 1975, and traditionally in areas like housing, social welfare, employment, equality. But in the course of our work, we have seen how climate change and other environmental factors directly impact people's housing, for example, due to flooding, or health due to dirty air. And we're also alert to the potential unfairness, as we've discussed, of climate action measures on marginalised groups, whether that is, for example, through job loss or energy poverty. And for us, environmental justice ensures that marginalised groups are not disproportionately impacted by climate change itself or other environmental harms, and that the state's response to environmental challenges is both inclusive and fair. And as you mentioned, Mary Robinson launched our centre last week, and what we'd be hoping to do in that centre is a regular legal advice clinic on environmental justice issues, which started on Tuesday, training and information resources on environmental justice to organisations, including a pilot training programme for local development companies around the country, and I think some are here today. Research partnered with DCU on the key dimensions of environmental injustice experienced by marginalised communities, advocate in the area of law reform and policy development, and critically litigation, which is sometimes necessary to create effective responses to environmental problems so that the voices of those most impacted are heard and changes are made. So the ultimate goal, I suppose, of the centre is to educate, engage and empower communities through the law to build a better and more equal society for all. And while we've only just started, there are certain issues that we know about that we expect to be working on. And it's that kind of intersectionality piece, that issue of perception. It's about making that connection and joining the dots between climate and other issues facing our communities. So, for example, we know that individuals and families living in coastal and flood risk areas whose homes are uninsurable will face an increased risk of flooding every year due to changing weather patterns and projected sea level rise. Another example is air pollution. We know from the most recent Environmental Protection Agency report that approximately 1,300 people die prematurely in Ireland every year. And this impacts certain groups more because of where they live, where they can afford to live, the level and quality of healthcare they have access to, or because of existing respiratory problems. And it also affects young children because of the fact that they take more breaths, because of their height and they're closer to car exhaust. And we saw that in the conclusion of a recent inquest in London, which found that air pollution was a cause in the tragic death of 9-year-old Ella Kissy Deborah, who died of respiratory failure after being exposed to excessive air pollution. We also know, for example, that the recent Youth Work Ireland report showed that 71% of landfill sites and waste incinerators in the country are located in areas that are below the national average of deprivation. We know that energy poverty is a really significant issue, made worse by COVID because people are spending more time at home, with those in social and private rented housing, those who are unemployed, one-parent families, members of the travelling community at particular risk. And we know also that there are barriers to access to justice on environmental matters. So, for example, while it's crucial that environmental NGOs are empowered to fight for clean air, water and a healthy environment because the environment isn't able to speak for itself, there's currently no legal aid available for environmental NGOs seeking access to the courts. And this was highlighted recently by Judge Anthony Collins, a judge of the General Court of the European Union, who called for improved access to the courts for activists due to the fact that Ireland has, in his words, displayed historically astonishing reluctance to comply with the EU environmental laws and only seem to pay attention when taken to court. So, I mean, our casework and our law reform is always groundwork. So in addition to all of these issues that we've identified externally, I expect that there'll be a lot more coming through our doors in the coming months.
Very exciting times, Rose, and thanks for all you're doing in that area. It's, I think for, when we talk about empowerment, and it's something that we don't, you know, the word empowerment gets bandied around a lot, but we've seen communities disempowered. And we've seen the power taken away from communities over a number of decades, and this is about returning that, and there can be no more clear way of doing that than through legal empowerment. So thanks for all you're doing. Lauren, we might jump back to you and speak a little bit, you know, obviously Donegal has a wonderful history of cooperatives, and Ardara was a heart of a textile industry at one stage. And the People's Transition is kind of contingent upon the idea that cooperatives can be reimagined in the world of climate action. Maybe you might want to just give us a little bit of insight about what you think is needed to like really unleash that power of community in terms of coming together to create solutions.
Well, I think everything that you're doing, I mean, the whole thing of community empowerment and that mind hive and the collective and gaining knowledge in that way is that's how you do it. Like, yeah, we have a really strong history. We were a market town. People came from everywhere to sell their wares here, whether that be farming, fishing, or we have a really rich weaving history and lace making. So like, I feel that very strongly that this, I mean, everything that all of the speakers have said today, I feel like is really aligned with what's possible within communities. And I think that there couldn't be a better time for this to happen. People are they want the communities to survive, especially post-pandemic. Like, people are struggling, people have been really affected. But within that, people are still really supporting each other and they're coming together. And so I think it's the knowledge that you gain from having those conversations with the wider community. That's how you figure out how the cooperatives will work. I mean, we have a, for example, community garden and things like St. Shanahan House is literally, I can see it out my window here. That's sheltered housing, but that's an amazing. There are so many amazing parts to our community and things that are going on here in the wider community. In Glenties, they have a youth hub. In Portneuf, they have a family resource centre. For me, that's saying we're all working together. We're here to provide for the community. We're listening to what the community need, and we're saying we have this event on for you, or let's see what we can do here. So like, for me anyway, I think that it's already happening in lots of ways. And I think it was Rose said about joining the dots there. So that's what it's about, finding ways to make that work now, in the current climate we're in. And I think that it can only be positive things that come from this.
Thanks, Lauren. That's music to my ears anyway. And I think really what we're talking about is putting trust in communities and putting the correct resources at their disposal so that they can realize their full potential. It's a bit of a no-brainer. Anya, I might just go to you finally for maybe a little bit of visioning work on 2040 and with your work in Teagasc. What if you were to imagine a healthy, thriving rural Ireland in 2040, what would you like to have seen happen between now and then? What would give you confidence that we were on the right path?
Thanks, Sean. And I think Anya O'Gorman will respond to that from the perspective of her own work. But certainly in a Teagasc perspective, we're currently rolling out a number of demonstration farms, which I mentioned earlier, a very new and exciting program called the Signpost Farm Program. And we're really taking that multi-actor approach involving industry, the farmers on the ground, and all of the various interests at a community level to combine efforts in exactly the way that you sketched out here. And it really is, it's really, often we're on the sidelines in terms of this co-design approach and attempting to make it mainstream. But where I would like to see by 2040 is that this is, as you called it, a no-brainer a few minutes ago, that this is the standard approach, because I think it's the potential to be hugely transformative. So that's my aspirations for 2040. Thanks, Sean.
Thank you very much, Anya. And thank you all the panelists for your time today and your expertise and your knowledge. Just before we move on to Anya O'Gorman, we're delighted, just to give a little bit of an introduction about what we're talking about here. Anya and myself spoke about this project, it must be a month ago, when it started to gain a head of steam, and Anya obviously does fantastic work with Stop Climate Chaos and Friends of the Earth, and in terms of activating and mobilizing communities. And so there's a real opportunity, I think, here in realizing these two pilot projects to share the learnings that come out of them and bring other communities into play insofar as possible. And so, Anya, maybe I could hand over to you to just, we didn't really fully figure out how this was going to work, but I might just hand over to you for a short presentation. Is that the plan?
Yeah, well, I have just something small to introduce myself and say. Fantastic. The first thing I would say, it's mad. I haven't been on a panel discussion before with another Anya. It's weird that our names are so rare. Anyway, so my name is Anya O'Gorman, and I work with Stop Climate Chaos. And one of the campaigns I work on is this one, the One Future campaign for faster and fair climate action. And really what that is about is working with groups of people across the country who really, really want to take action on climate, but are looking at it from a perspective of, no one in this country, well, very few people are climate deniers anymore. No one's saying that climate change isn't happening. But what we really need to be doing is we need to be demanding that the action that is taken and the decisions that are made at all levels of the political sphere, from community all the way up to the Dáil, are fast enough. So they're urgent enough to deal with the crisis, and they're fair enough. And I know I just came in at the end of Rose speaking there, so she's given you all the details about fairness on a national scale, and we also need to look at fairness on an international scale and the fair share that we have to do as an industrialized country, for countries that are being hit first and worst. So the idea behind the One Future campaign is really about that kind of democratic process. Part of it is linking in, I know there's a few TDs on the call, so hopefully you've been in touch with some people from this campaign, because what they really want to do is create a solid connection between constituents, people in their local areas, people in their communities, and the political system and TDs, to say, this is what's going on, this is what we need, this is what we want, can we have a chat with you about this piece of legislation? But also what's really important with the people that I'm working with is that recognition that, change happens across the spectrum of society and of life. And people were asking me, they were saying, look, I really want to do something in my own community. I really want to talk about just transition. How do I have these conversations? What can I do in my community? And then sure didn't I see Sean's project, and I went, hold on a second. This looks very interesting. So the conversations that we're talking about is really about thinking, how, so this is being piloted into communities, and lots of people, everyone, on this call obviously thinks that this is really interesting, it's exciting. I'm seeing this in the chat box. And if this is piloted, there's going to be, some issues. There's maybe going to be some learnings. We're going to figure out what skills do people need. Where there's expertise across the country that maybe can observe, oh, that's going on, but hold on, maybe I have a way, you might find a way around that. So I think what we're proposing and what we're planning to do is really to allow a space for learning to be shared across the communities that are participating in this pilot project, with people in the communities that I work with, so as we can really have those conversations and have a really open, like, emergent learning space, where we can share skills, share knowledge, share difficulties, identify, oh my God, that went super well. If we're doing this in our community, that's exactly what we can do. Or, Jesus, that is difficult. The redheads in the village are always, causing trouble, and they're so difficult to talk to. So what are we going to do about the redheads? And what skills are we going to need as part of our communities if we're talking about a just transition for community development? So I suppose what we're looking at is, observing, supporting communities, cross-pollinating, and hopefully achieving some kind of ripple effect of just transition within communities across Ireland. But we're really taking it slow and in an emergent way to facilitate those. And I think there will be important discussions to be had. And it's really like a learning space that we're envisaging. So yeah.
I'm on mute again. Thank you, Anya. I think maybe just to follow up on that, first of all, we might let people know about when is the first session taking place and how they might get involved, or do they need to be involved with the campaign first before joining?
Not at all. So we'll have a kind of information night next Monday evening at 5:30. So if anyone, Sean has the information, so you can send Sean an email after this and he can send you on the information. And yeah, there's local groups around every area. So you don't necessarily need to be involved in the One Future campaign, but if it is something that you're interested in, it could be a way to just connect with other people in your area who are interested in this. But the more the merrier. The more people we have, the richer the experience will be, and the richer the amount of bank of knowledge that hopefully we can share with each other.
One for sure, and there's a load of elements that I'm very excited about this sort of capacity building strand that runs parallel. But one thing that is quite exciting is getting an understanding of who participates and who typically finds it hard to participate. And I think there's a real opportunity through this network as well to ask those questions nationwide and encourage those who do participate to look beyond themselves and learn about bringing others into the fold.
Yeah, absolutely. And I think there's at one level there is, a great ideal of, if we can roll this project out among lots of communities. And at another level, I suppose, regardless of what happens, that these kind of conversations are really important. Like, we always need to be asking, who are we including, especially in the climate movement in Ireland, whose voices aren't being heard. And I know that's a lot of the work that Rose is doing, and really working to find ways to listen to those voices, hear those voices, include those voices in a really meaningful way. So I think this is going to be a really powerful process, whatever the outcome, because we do need to, we need to be doing that work. And this is a great way to be learning from each other across the country about how that work is being done.
Thanks, Sonia. I'm cognizant we're coming up on time. Is there anything else you'd like to add in terms of people can get involved from next Monday, and they should probably, regardless, try to get involved with their local One Future group? Is there anything else you'd like to add?
No, just that I think it's, I definitely think getting involved with your local One Future group is a really, really great way to meet other people in your area who are taking action with this kind of faster and fairer tilt on climate action. And I just think it's really great to see so many people. So do keep engaged. There's lots of opportunities. What we're trying to do is give people across the country opportunities to link into projects like this, and to think in this way. So yeah, keep engaged and keep an eye. But it's great to see so many people here.
Thanks a million, Anya, and I'll echo that. Yes, it is great to see. It's been phenomenal, actually. Like Shana said, we kind of planned to have a soft launch just to socialize the idea and get it out there, and we put the ad up, and within 24 hours we had 150 people signed up. It was phenomenal, and we've wonderful interest. A number of people have mentioned, but we've wonderful interest from local and national decision makers. I'm delighted to see in the chat Minister O'Brien, who's been very supportive of this initiative. I know Thomas Pringle is watching. I think there's what we have to make sure with this approach is that just as it includes everyone in the community, that at the political level it includes everyone too, and because this is not something that is a political a political football. It should be common to absolutely everyone who cares about the future of the communities they represent, and so we're delighted that there is such an interest from our elected representatives. I think we might start to wrap up, but remarkably we've kept the time, which is great. I'd just like to say thanks again to Lauren, to Rose, to both Anyas, and to Daniel, who has left us. I also would sincerely like to thank the team at AIB, who have been very, very helpful and facilitative of everything so far, and looking forward to working with them going forward. And Shana, I might, if you're there and you want to come back in, I might hand back to you. We hadn't quite worked out an ending, so it's okay too if you don't.
No, don't worry about putting me on the spot. Thank you for everyone that has shown up today. We've had over 100 people who've joined us today. We really appreciate you taking the time. And please follow us in our progress on this journey. I am very, very confident that it will go well. I do want to echo Sean. I appreciate everyone who has shown initial support, like Thomas Pringle and the Minister, Joe O'Brien, who's been there for quite a while in supporting this project. I also wanted to give a shout out to Eileen Flynn, the senator who happens to live in Ardara. We will be in touch if you're still there, because we will, of all the places you could live, we will be in touch to talk to you about the project, as well as all the local councillors. I can see in the chat space that they're commenting. So thank you very much for coming, and thank you, panelists, for taking the time out to join us. And we will be in touch with you. We will let you know how we're getting on. Thanks, Sean.
Thanks, Shana. Just one last person to thank is John White from TASC, who's been and always is phenomenal in terms of putting these events together. Guys, yeah, thank you very much to everyone, and we will. I think we'll just conclude it there and look forward to working with you all in the future.
Thanks so much.
Thank you very much.
Bye, guys.